We did a needs assessment survey at through SEAC, the Heritage at Risk task force. And so we've been working on crunching the results. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and shout out to Lindsay and to Remy and Ben and Meredith. Ben and Meredith have done lots of the data crunching in ways that are very crucial as um, funny story, both Remy and I thought we were giving this paper. So we were both frantically working on the last minute and then realizing that each other had done a lot of heavy lifting and it was very lovely. So very excited to have all of these great colleagues. Southeastern Archaeological Conference, we founded the Heritage at Risk Task Force in 2022, and this was after there's a young archaeologist who died in the field in northern Louisiana, and kind of a call to action that came from some folks. And this really kind of unified and brought together a lot of the things that we were already doing, that a lot of folks were already doing at SEAC. And we kind of laid out the task force with the goal to identify the best methods to support and encourage CX members and others in addressing and planning for and reacting to the impacts from climate change. Um, when we started, we kind of thought we would be creating things that were like board-approved guidelines, training opportunities to identify and define heritage at risk, best practice guides for addressing kind of all of the spectrum of the things, practical, cultural, archaeological, economic impacts of the climate crisis to Southeastern archaeology and its practitioners. And so we really have learned a lot from members and the wider community. The survey was not open just to SEAC members about how people are currently engaging with issues related to global climate change and what resources and materials would help in the short and long terms. So we have had presentations, workshops, in the surveys, and we kicked off the task force in 2022 with a plenary session at SEAC with a slew of papers that covered the many facets of the intersection of climate change and Southeastern archaeology. We had an overview of the broad scale science of global human-driven climate changes from Lindsay, approaches to safe and effective fieldwork. Meg spoke on this. Collaborative and equitable approaches to documenting and protecting impacts to sites. So I gave a paper and Sarah on some of these issues, and then Dave gave a great overview of the impacts that we could see to archaeology and all the different facets there. And we really wanted to link these changes to the effects currently being experienced by Southeastern archaeologists and provide a larger context for how the field must adapt to meet the needs of the crisis. We are still working on publishing these. We're at the finish line in an edited volume of Southeastern Archaeology. So hopefully it'll be out in 2026. So we had the plenary, and then we started kind of meeting monthly with, come one, come all kind of approach to anyone who is interested in joining. And we realized that if we were going to start creating these deliverables, we needed to understand, the kind of current state of things and how what people need, what people want. So we started a needs assessment survey. We launched it at the conference in 2023. And it was aimed at SEAC members, but also open to anyone who wanted to take the survey. We wanted to learn more about the experiences and needs in addressing climate impacts to cultural resources. We asked the basic demographic questions. Who are you? Where do you work? What sector? How old? What's your experience in the field? And then we asked questions about the impacts of climate change on archaeological sites, and then the methods that are currently being used both to track and monitor as well as to mitigate these impacts. When we created the survey, we used the language in the National Park Service's, they had a cultural resource climate change strategy, and in it was like a table of impacts to resources. So we drew the language from there to describe the different impacts that we were seeing. And looking beyond just, the archaeological sites, we also asked about collections, because that's important. If we're going to dig all the things up, what's the fate of them? And then also about fieldwork, because that was, how are we adapting ourselves and our fieldwork strategies? And then we asked how SEAC could best serve the community through, workshops, best practices guides, other kinds of resources. So just to see what people might be interested in. We used Qualtrics to host it, and as I say, we launched it and promoted it at the annual meeting. We sent it out in emails, through on the website, through social media. And we also promoted it at places like Nahar, and we sent it out to SHA's Heritage at Risk Committee. We kept it open, through the fall and into January, so we could catch folks at SHA. So last year at SEAC, we presented some of the preliminary themes of the survey in Williamsburg during a poster session that was on Heritage at Risk, and we found there was more more to be learned about the experiences with climate change. We had some very simple questions, and some of the written in comments were really juicy, and we wanted to learn more and unpack more and get more input from folks. So we used the poster session as an opportunity to collect follow-up interviews. I think we wanted to do kind of like focus groups, and it ended up just kind of being little chats with people at the poster session. And I also want to shout out, Meg had a great workshop at the conference on recovering collections and how to recover collections and archive materials from disaster situations. So in hopes of kind of building a community of folks to help respond. So now it's going to be a very boring looking PowerPoint with lots of statistics and numbers and charts and graphs, but it's good information. So we gathered responses from 130 people who answered at least one of the questions, and we had 108 people who completed all or most of the survey. What happened is we were concerned that people would not fill out the demographics if we put that on a second page. So we actually did that first. And so most people went through and did both the demographics as well as the like meaty climate change part of the survey. But we had some folks who just didn't click through to the second page to fill that out. We had a pretty good split between male and female. We had age range spanning from 21 to 84. We had an average age of 53, but most of the participants were in their 40s. Unsurprisingly, 91% of them worked in Southeastern US. And it was a very well-educated group. So most folks had either a master's degree or a PhD. And then participants had an average of 32 years in the field. So we had people who were just starting out and had, that they had 0 years of experience. We had folks who have been in this for 63 years, but most folks were somewhere between 10 and 20 years of experience in the field. We asked what people's primary work setting was, and kind of the three main categories we saw at about a quarter each of the participants were government. On the survey itself, we broke this down into federal, tribal, state, and local, but I've kind of smashed it together just to talk in broader strokes for this presentation. A quarter of the folks were from the private sector who did some sort of CRM type job, and a quarter of the folks were from academia. So we had some other, we had 10% students, 10% retired, and then some other folks like FPanners who are in the NGO nonprofit world. So we started putting together the survey about impacts and things, and Lindsay's like, why don't we just ask people if they're concerned about climate change? And I think that was a great question, and I feel like this is one of the most important things that we can now say. Survey of 100 archaeologists, and 90% of them are strongly agree that they are concerned about climate change. And I feel like this is one of those nice stats that you can take with you when you go to talk to people and say, like, no, people in Southeastern archaeology are overwhelmingly concerned about what's happening, and we need to do something about it. Getting into the impacts to archaeological sites. So we ask folks, I am seeing climate change impacts on the archaeological sites where I work. We ask them to agree or disagree. And I think it's 97% of folks were in agreement in some capacity, and it's 67% were strongly agreeing. Then we listed out a lot of different impacts, once again, taken from the NPS climate impact table. We did filter, like we did not include permafrost because we did not think that was a pressing issue in the Southeast. But of those, we just let people, select what was the top three impacts that they were seeing, or sorry, what impacts they were seeing where they were. And of the responses we got, the top three impacts were increased global temperatures, increased coastal erosion, and extreme weather events. Um, I was interested in, what are we doing about it currently? So we asked how folks were tracking or monitoring impacts at the site. And we tried to come up with different options, different things that we were doing personally or we had seen others do. So we came up with quantitative methods. So actually pulling a tape measure or using some device to take measurements, doing desktop monitoring, so using things like satellite imagery to track changes, qualitative measurements, so that's more like, written descriptions, taking photographs, things that are describing it, but less number crunchy, crowdsourcing data, so, having people do like citizen science monitoring kind of things. And then, just thinking about putting this into your future research. Um, so the top three things that people were already doing are the qualitative monitoring, incorporating it into future research, and then doing desktop monitoring. This table kind of lays it out based on what sector people were in. I was interested to see if there are, more people in the private sector who are already responding, or more people, at NGOs that are already responding. And it's good to see like there's kind of a like people across all all aspects of the field are doing it. I was excited to see so many students that were, hopefully including this in their research and thinking about this and working on this, because that's the future of the field, right? And if things go the way we think they are, it's just going to get worse. So, and then we asked how people are actually taking steps to mitigate impacts. So not just observing what's happening, but taking action to do something about it. And once again, we pulled up some different ways that we've seen people do this. So relocating resources, doing engineered protections like seawalls or bulkheads or living shorelines, just doing salvage archaeology and full data recovery, taking like non-invasive kind of approaches to do like geophysical surveys, or those kinds of things. Digital documentation, things like 3D modeling, planned abandonment in place. It is a strategy, right? And then, once again, incorporating this into future research. And once again, we see people across all the sectors doing things. Um, and the three top answers were salvage archaeology, incorporating things into future research, and then digital documentation. I feel like there's you see that the government folks and the CRM folks are doing a little more of this, and that makes sense to me. I can see that these are the folks that are actively managing the sites or they are being hired to participate in these kinds of projects a little more than like a student would be, or maybe the academic folks are limited because they're just going out and studying the sites, but maybe don't get a final say over what's happening with them in the way that the land managers do. Impacts to the archaeological collections. Once again, we asked folks if they agreed with this statement. I'm seeing climate change impacts on the collections I work with, and a little less convinced than the field sites. But we had 76% of people answering in agreement, and most folks somewhat agreed. It was about 38%. And then we listed once again the same impacts, and we saw higher relative humidity, increased global temperatures, and extreme weather events as the three biggest impacts to collections. So what are we doing? Once again, we listed some different options, relocating resources, upgrading facilities, documenting resources digitally, planned abandonment in place, and then incorporating considerations of impacts into future research. I should say we also listed none as things that people may be doing, and yeah. So once again, kind of spread evenly. People are doing lots of different things across the sectors, digital documentation, thinking about future research, and facility upgrades were the biggest ones. The academia facilities had like no, it didn't look like they were getting many upgrades. So I'm like, maybe we should pass the hat to get some more funding to some of those facilities. But it was good to see, a lot of steps folks were taking there. So then impacts to archaeological fieldwork. And so for this, we just asked people to check off, what impacts were affecting their field days. And once again, they could select more than one option. And the top three impacts, and you'll see it's a pretty big trend across the board: increased global temperatures, higher relative humidity, and extreme weather events. So these are, similar effects on all sorts of, whether it's the collections or the sites or the people. We're seeing these impacts. 86% of people selected at least one impact. So, most people are seeing some sort of impact of what's happening. Um, And then how are we mitigating these impacts to the fieldwork? Once again, we listed out things that we thought people were things we'd heard people were doing or had incorporated into our own projects. Increased safety briefings, adjusting work schedules, adjusting field dates, changing your research design, providing alternative work environments, and providing non-traditional field schools. And the top impacts, or sorry, the top changes people are seeing are adjusting the work schedule and the field dates and increased safety briefings. And once again, this was pretty well spread across all sectors, but I feel like there was a little more change, maybe in some of the CRM folks. But once again, these are the people who I would assume are spending more days out of the year in the field, so they're having to really change what they're doing. So that was kind of the written survey responses. And as I say, we wanted to work on some follow-up interviews. So myself and Lindsay and Rami conducted informal interviews with 17 people at SEAC, mostly just chatting with people who stopped by the posters, and we recorded the conversations on our cell phones. And we used the question, can you tell me a story about how climate change has affected your work as an archaeologist? If they didn't reveal it through the course of that story, we followed up to ask kind of what sector do you work in? How long have you been in the field? Some of those kind of questions. And we took all of those interviews and, transcribed them, and did some coding in Deduce qualitative data analysis software. And Meredith put together this word cloud based on the themes we identified in the responses. So what do we talk about when we talk about climate change and archaeology? It's people, unsurprisingly, right? How are archaeologists' workaday lives affected by climate change? How is the job made more challenging or dangerous? And what are the effects on human health and safety? And so I have just a couple of quotes that kind of stood out that help summarize some of those themes. So folks, talking about the working conditions, and that people aren't talking about them. And summers are getting hotter, and there's more. There's the woman who died, and more injuries are just going to happen. And this was a common sentiment. Concerns about heat injury and how to identify it, how do you address it. Um, and I think it's a little optimistic because we did see, uh, you know, the advocacy that's happening or that needs to happen, and the field's kind of starting to change. So, somebody said that SEAC should advocate for more strict safety standards regarding climate and weather. The idea that anyone should be working in temperatures above a heat index of 105 degrees is ridiculous. We know some people can handle it, and we know a certain percentage of people have been doing it for years and they're okay with it, but none of us should have to be okay with it. And another person, commented that there's a tough it out kind of attitude, and that we need to address that and say, no, it's different now. The temperatures are extreme and you can't tough it out anymore. Like we have to change the way we approach that sort of work. And we did hear about how people are changing their field practices. So people talking about doing things like starting work super early in the morning, uh, ending before 3 o'clock, because of the possibility of someone overheating, keeping things like liquid IV and ice water on them, and being on their radios and communicating, has everyone had water? Are you doing okay? Um, and expressing that they had somebody almost pass out. With a heat stroke in the field. Uh, by chance, the follow-up interviews were conducted not long after Hurricane Helene. So we heard a lot of comments about that experience from some of the people we interviewed, concerns about the safety of working at sites that have been contaminated from storm surge, and flooding that may have had compromised septic or sewer or wastewater systems. So somebody commented on the E. coli within the sediments, and that there was industrial waste in Asheville that was maybe stable, but then was picked up and moved around because of the hurricane and the flooding. And another respondent noted that we need layers of awareness regarding whether it's safe to us to go on a site because of whatever materials are now on top of it, if it may be hazarded to our health, and how to, figuring out how to determine that, or even knowing if we should be asking these questions before we go to a project area. So where do we go from here? Um, I will say, as uh, as somebody who designed this survey, my experiences doing this kind of work in Florida through FPN, we started trying to talk about heritage risk and climate change with people, and we started trying to play these planning games. And what I very quickly realized is, people are not concerned about the Shellman or the lighthouse or the historic building when they can't get to the hospital because the roads are gone, and we have to figure out how to address that, right? So our approach, my mindset that I've been working in is that, what can we do for the cultural resources today so that when we get to that point in the future, when we're trying to figure out how to make sure that the roads to the hospital are accessible, we can feel good and we can feel that we've done something, and I feel like the results of the survey are actually reflecting kind of an opposite mentality of that. So we focused a lot on, these impacts to the sites and the resources and what are you doing about them. And most people wanted to talk about the health and safety concerns that are growing. So I feel like the result of the survey has kind of shifted my mindset, and that it's no longer let's do for the sites so we can worry about the people when it gets dire. And it's now at the point of let's worry about the people so we can go out and do for the sites. Um, because I think it's already the impacts are already here. So, some of the questions that we were asking were more about the sites. So how can we help you, or more about climate change in general? How can we help you better understand, describe, and talk about climate change? And, folks said workshops and training on the impacts of climate change to the resources, lecture series on, projects and methods, best guides for communicating about climate change. And some of the conversations that we had had at the task force, it was like, uh, people expressing, you know, if I need to go discuss this, is there a slideshow that I can take and have it ready? That would help me explain these things to people. Um, and then, we asked once again about the resources specifically and how can we help with that? And it was, once again, best practice guides and workshops and training and all. Um, but as I say, the contrast with the free responses and the follow-up interviews suggests that we're mostly concerned about human beings. And I suspect that the broad thematic differences between the interview and the questionnaires is a product of how we designed the survey and the instruments that we used. So when we ask people to put fieldwork and health and safety on, in kind of equal settings with collection management impacts to sites, um, they answered about the sites and all, but like I say, the free response answers focus more on health and safety. And then when we just ask an open-ended question about climate change and work, people were not talking about sites getting washed away. They were talking about the threats to their own personal safety and livelihood and that of their colleagues. So what can SEAC do to help? Once again, there were a lot of comments about heat stress and injury. So, somebody expressed the need to understand what heat stresses look like before people get heat stroke, because it doesn't look the same for everybody and not everyone feels the same when it happens. So ensuring that we can provide training and resources to help people understand those and identify them and be prepared to respond to them. Um, Provide guidelines to support employees in negotiating for altered working schedules and to prevent working in the worst working conditions. It was very disheartening, some of the comments that we got. I think there was not a lot of faith in a top-down systemic approach to this change, especially for people who felt like they were at the lowest position in a company or on a team. And feeling we had somebody come up to Meg and I after the presentation and express that she and her kind of folks who were on in the field crew and the tech crew um, were afraid to confront, the supervisor to express concern about the working conditions, because that person was, had more experience and had been there longer. And, so I think that was very disheartening. And I think anything we can do to help prepare and arm those folks who don't have confidence in speaking up and seeing that change, that we can give them the statistics, we can give them the guides, and have that help them start those conversations and put weight behind their concerns that they're trying to express. Um, and advocating for systemic changes that prioritize health and safety over research, over bottom lines, over anything else. And really kind of trying to cultivate a better ecosystem and a better culture of care, and saying that people come first and these are the most important resources that we have in the field. And I think working with some of the other organizations, SHA and SAA and NAHAR and all of these groups, to kind of provide a united front, RPA, to once again have these similar resources and the similar stance. And I think that's the way to ensure that these changes are widespread and will help protect everyone. So closing thought. In summation, the results of the survey suggest that a heritage at-risk committee should provide both methodological support to work on impacted sites, but most importantly, provide structural support and advocacy to help change the field to ensure we can continue to work safely. We hope that this information can help turn the task force into a committee that can help create all of these resources and guides. And so if you're interested in that, we would love help and input and impact. And I'm also interested to see what other folks think about these results, and if this is things that you were expecting, or any comments you have.